Has anybody ever just had a meal or something to eat that, when you think back on, still makes you kind of gag? Like just something, just something that you've eaten that was just so awful, so beyond. And if that is something that your spouse gives to you regularly, I feel sorry for you. But I I was thinking this week, just in preparing for this message today, I remembered a time when a few years back that I had opportunity. I was traveling through Eastern Europe, and one of the places that we were going to as a team is we were going to Belarus. And if you're not familiar with Belarus, Belarus is the last active dictatorship in Europe. And in Belarus, Christianity is not allowed. And there's a state-run church, but as far as individual churches, as we would think of them, a gathering like this, that is not allowed. So as we were traveling through that country and visiting underground churches, which is an amazing story in itself that someday I'll tell, but not this day, I was traveling with a group of Latvian men, and because they spoke Russian, and we were fed a lot of different things, and none of which was very yummy. And if you can imagine 6 or 7 guys all traveling around in a van with a steady diet of boiled potatoes, onions, and copious amounts of cabbage, then it was not always the most pleasant of journeys. Yeah, you can let your minds go. Yeah, right there, it's okay. It's one of those things. I mean, it's what humanizes all of us, isn't it? Anyway, during this 10 days that we were spending together, the Latvians and I, we had some ongoing pranks and things we would do. And one of the things, because they were the diet that the Russians were eating was not all that different from what the Latvians would eat. And as I was struggling through a lot of stuff, for them, it was no big deal. But I was looking forward to, because they had told me on the last day of this trip that we would go to this wonderful restaurant in Minsk, which is the capital of Belarus. And this restaurant featured foods from all over the world, including Western foods. And I was thinking, finally, I'm going to get something good to eat. And so we went to this restaurant, and I have to admit, I was excited. And I'm walking through, it was buffet style, and I'm looking at different things, and I'm loading up my tray and I'm just thinking, this is so awesome, because I feel like I've almost been fasting for 10 days. And and I saw, it was just like when I saw this, it was like angels were singing, it was like, oh, but I saw this amazing cherry cheesecake, and I love cherry cheesecake. I'm not a big sweet eater, but cherry cheesecake is a weakness. Hint, hint to anybody that makes a good one. And and I saw this, and I went up, and I said, oh, something's happening. Oh, thank you. But you know what it was? It was communion bread, because it's gluten-free, and a crumb went right down in my lungs. But thank you. And anyway, I saw this, what was this cherry cheesecake, and I took the biggest piece I could find, because why wouldn't I? And we got back to our table, and we're all sitting and eating, and we all ate our dinners, and I just kept thinking, I'm saving room. I got to save room because I want that cake. And sure enough, we got done, and I reached for it, and I brought it over, and I should have known, because my Latvian brothers, they were all just like, they did one of these, and they had these half grins on their faces, and I'm thinking, well, it's because they love me. And they're just so happy for me after this week of sacrifice I've made that now I'm going to get one of my favorite foods on earth. And so I actually made a big show of it. I cut a big piece with my fork, and I brought it out like this, and they're just like following it around. And I just did one of those, almost like an airplane thing you do with kids. I was like, oh, like this. You would think I would have smelled it. When what that was hit my tongue, it was like my entire mouth was immediately filled with a pasty film of oil. And like even right now, like I could almost drool in thinking about it. What it was some kind of fish gelatin with like a fermented fish eye topping. Apparently Russians love it. Don't ask me why. But when it hit my mouth, I was just like, I didn't even want to move for fear that another taste bud would get a bit of it. And I'm just like, I literally hit like, hey. And I tried to make it fall out of my mouth, but it was like so oily and sticky. It was there. And I ended up doing this at the table. And those guys were laughing so hard, the cabbage was coming out. That wasn't in my notes. I'm sorry. Sometimes Tara doesn't let me out at all. You know, I actually say all that not just to make you laugh, but to kind of prepare you for this morning's message, because if you think that's gross, there is a portion of Scripture where people were eating something that is beyond that, I'm sure. And it's found in 2 Kings, chapter 6, verses 24 to 29. I'm just going to read this to you. See if you can't get your head around it. Sometime later, however, King Ben-Hadad of Aram mustered his entire army and besieged Samaria. So here's what you have to know. You remember Ahab from last week or the week before, the most evil king in the history of Israel. He had a son, and his son was now king. And his son had moved the capital to Samaria, which was just a hotbed of pagan religions and whatnot. And he had just carried on in Ahab's vein, and he was just a horrible, terrible, ungodly king. And so God had raised up an enemy army against him to try to snap him back to reality. And this king, Ben-Hadad, had surrounded Samaria, surrounded the capital city of Israel at that time. So as a result, there was a great famine in the city. We don't know how long they were surrounding, but it was long enough, you'll see. So the siege lasted so long that a donkey's head sold for 80 pieces of silver. And that donkey's head was not to hang on your wall, that was to eat. And a cup of dove's dung sold for 5 pieces of silver. I think there was some dove's dung in whatever I ate in Russia. That was probably the crumbly bit on the bottom. I mean, that's pretty nasty. One day, as the king of Israel was walking along the wall of the city, a woman called to him, "Please help me, my lord." The king answered, "If the Lord doesn't help you, what can I do?" Well, here's her problem. "I have neither food from the threshing floor nor wine from the press to give you," the king said. "What is the matter?" She replied, This woman said to me, this woman said to me, "Let's eat your son today. Then we will eat my son tomorrow." So we cooked my son and we ate him. And the next day I said to her, "Kill your son so we can eat him." But she's hidden her son. Okay, this is the woman's problem. It's not that she's eating this stuff. She's upset because she wanted more. And her friend was holding out on her. I mean, that's nasty. And it's probably no wonder it doesn't get preached on a lot. And you're probably wondering, what on earth is this guy doing today? We signed up for a Vision Sunday, and he's telling, welcome to church. What on earth? Like, imagine a famine so bad that's what it's happening. That people are so hungry that they're eating dove's dung, donkey heads, and quite literally each other. It's the state that nation, that city was in at that time. But thankfully, there's more to this story. It doesn't stop there, and it gets a little less nasty. So let's just keep reading on in it. So now we're going to move ahead a little bit to 2 Kings chapter 7, verses 3 to 8. And we're going to find 4 lepers at the gate of the city. And the 4 lepers, that's not like a 60s R&B band. These are real lepers. And you think if it was a 60s R&B band, like what would their greatest hit be? Like Footloose, you know? It's just like, oh, it's terrible, eh? I should go home. I should go home now. Well, there's still a little bit of sanity left. I'm sorry, I don't know where all this is coming from, and it's bad. Anyway, there's 4 men with leprosy sitting at the entrance of the city gates. Why should we sit here waiting to die? They asked each other. We will starve if we stay here. You understand, lepers at that time, they were outcasts, right? So they were the lowest of the low in the caste system, and no one wanted to touch them or get near them, and so they were always kept off to the side somewhere. They weren't allowed to mingle. In fact, when they would walk through a city, they had to constantly be yelling, leper, 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 so people would know to stay away from them. So they're sitting at the gates and right, talking to one another. We're going to starve if we stay here, but with the famine in the city, we'll starve if we go back there. So we might as well go out and surrender ourselves to the Aramean army. If they let us live, so much the better. But if they kill us, we would have died anyway. So at twilight, they set out for the camp of the Arameans. What bad options, right? If we stay, we die. If we go into the city, we die. If we surrender to this enemy army that's trying to starve us out, we'll probably die. Not a great bunch of options. When we came to the edge of the camp, no one was there. For the Lord had caused the Aramean army to hear the clatter of speeding chariots and the galloping of horses and the sounds of a great army approaching. The king of Israel has hired Hittites and Egyptians to attack us, they cried to one another. So they panicked and they ran into the night. They abandoned their tents, their horses and donkeys, and everything else as they fled for their lives. When the men with leprosy arrived at the edge of the camp, they went into one tent after another, eating and drinking wine, and they carried off silver and gold and clothing, and they hid it. Wow. How their fortunes changed. In a moment, they went from having nothing to look forward to but death, and now they have an opportunity for life. They arrived at that camp empty, physically empty. No food in their bellies, but also empty of hope. They went from empty to fully satisfied. They went from hopeless, they went to hopeful. All of a sudden, they could see a future for themselves, however limited it might be, because after all, they still had leprosy. They still did not have a happy, necessarily, road ahead of them, but it was so much better than what they had had just moments before. And you can imagine them sitting there and just saying, like, look at this. We have got we've got everything they've left behind. We've got tents. Like we can live. We can make camps, and we've got gold and silver. We'll be able to buy food. We'll never have to be hungry again. We have everything we need. What a wonderful thing. What a wonderful place for them to be in all of a sudden. But you know what? They're about to have a pretty big moment. Almost a change of heart, as it were. So let's get back to Scripture. Very next verse. Finally, they said to one another, this is not right. This is a day of good news, and we aren't sharing it with anyone. Come on, let's go back and tell the people at the palace. Isn't that amazing? Isn't it amazing? They had this opportunity to be wealthy, almost to rub it in the faces of people that would have scorned them and spit on them and walked past them and not give them the time of day and forced them to identify themselves as lepers everywhere they went, and the horrible life they lived, and they just had this flash of, you know what, we can't keep this to ourselves. This is good news. And so they went and they shared it with the people of the palace, meaning the people of that city, giving them that message. You can be free, and there's riches out here, and there's food. You don't have to be hungry. You can have all this stuff. What an amazing thing for them to do. You know what? Here's the thing we need to understand. Christianity it's an event. It's not a philosophy. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is this. No one is sitting under a tree one day who has never heard of Jesus or never heard of God or the gospel or anything like that. No one is just lying there contemplating the meaning of life and coming up with the story of, you know what, in the beginning there must be a God. And he must have been great and glorious, and he must have created everything, and even me. And my ancestors, they must have been living with him in a paradise, in a garden, and they must have been able to maybe live there forever and commune with this God. And then one day they decided they wanted to be gods themselves, and so they went on their own path. And as a result of going on their own path, they essentially chose death over life, and God let them, because this God that we're making up in our minds, he's like that. But there would be a problem, because this God is a just God, and that would have to be, somehow that would have to be reconciled, the choice they make. They would have to have a path back, but because they chose death, there would be a price to pay, and that price would have to be overcome. And I know what we need is a perfect individual come down and live a perfect life and make that never turn from God and make that sacrifice and die, and then that death would replace my death. No one's ever going to just come up with that. All of that became a reality when Jesus came to earth. It was an event, not a philosophy. It wasn't good thinking. It wasn't good intentions. It actually happened. For those lepers, they say this is good news. It was an event. They never saw it coming. They were rescued. They were taken out of that mess that they were in. And they were given this new opportunity. And what did they want to do? They wanted to share it. And you know what? That's our jobs. Because each and every one of us were not that far removed from those lepers. You know, at one point, for each and every one of us, we were facing death, not life. We really were hopeless. Now we can be filled with hope. We really were empty. And now we can be fulfilled. And that message that we have received, for those of us sitting in this room that accepted that sacrifice that Jesus made, for those of us who did that, we have an obligation to share that, not to sit on it. With great privilege comes great responsibility. And we have that. And it brings me to what we want to do as a church moving forward, and how the plans that we have moving forward into this year, how they actually connect and make this a reality that we can share in as a body, and that we can engage in individually to make it happen. And I boiled it down, and I'm not going to go into this in depth, just take 5 minutes to walk through these 10 things that we need to achieve this year, that we want to shoot for, the goals that we're aiming for as a body combined to help fulfill this mission that God's laid on all of us. And number 10 is we're aiming for 10 new folks to step up and actually tithe to this church. Actually give generously to the work of this church, not so that, you know, we can heat the building or this or that. I mean, that's part of it, but so that we can actually reach out and engage this community, and people who are separated from Christ can become connected to Christ, because it's part of our duty. It's part of our jobs. It's what we're called to do. So we're praying and believing that God will raise up 10 folks to step in and join the rest of us who do faithfully give. Number 9, and we're praying that 9 people actually take that step of being baptized, of making that public profession of their faith, or the public profession of the inward works that God has been doing in their lives, and they want to publicly say, I'm on side. I'm God's child. It's actually one of only 2 things that Jesus commanded all Christians. 1 is remember me through communion, and 2, be baptized. It's an act of faith and it's an act of obedience. 8 new members. There are some folks from our body here that are stepping up to become members, which is a fully engaged individual in the church, in giving and volunteering, in sharing the good news that had been shared with them. Membership is a big step in one way, and it's a natural step in another. And number 7, we've been praying for and already seeing. Many of these things, as I'm going through them, even when we first revealed these in November, many of these things have already come to pass, by the way. Praise God. So some of these, as we walk through, we're knocking right on the door. We're already there, but these aren't goals that we've arrived when we reach, right? These are goals that are leading to something else. So you'll see. So 7 new families we've been praying for, and so that's not 7 individuals. That's 7 families. That's folks with children who join us and help make us vital and alive. 6 new people. We already have people who serve out in the lobby, but we need folks that would be ushers. Any of you here that arrive, in the last couple of minutes just before the service, not only did you miss the full buffet dinner that we had 10 minutes before you got here. Sometimes it's hard. It's hard to. Yeah, I hear that. It's hard to find a seat sometimes. And so we really need someone that can help usher, right? These are practical needs that we have, and we're hoping that 6 new people will join in that ministry and say, yeah, you know what? I would like to be a welcoming face. I would like to be that person, a difference maker, as it were, for someone on that morning. Number 5 would be 5 new building improvements. So for a nursery, what we're hoping to do is to move the nursery upstairs into where the balcony area is, and putting up a plexiglass or Lexcan or something to cover up that opening, put speakers in there so that young parents or people with children don't have to feel that they're causing a ruckus in here or whatever. They can be up in a space that they can still see and hear the service, but tend to their children, so they don't have to be isolated somewhere else in the building. We want to make some improvements in our lobby to make it more welcoming and ingratiating for people that join us and people that are here every week. For Kids Point, if you ever went down there, it's wonderfully decorated. It's engaging with the kids. They love it down there, but we really need like a carpet or some covering on the floor to help absorb some sound. And kids, as you know, they crawl around, they roll around. It's a very practical thing. We'd like to do that. Here in the auditorium, there's some improvements we want to make, and we're looking to have closed circuit TV throughout the building to broadcast the service while it's happening, so people who are volunteering or doing things in different areas can still feel part of what's going on. And part of that closed circuit will be a live stream onto the internet. So the very practical goals. Number 4 big events. That's what we want to focus on. Instead of doing many things, which would be the Walmart approach, we want to be a little more focused and focus on 4 big things: Christmas, Easter, Kids Point or Kids Camp, that happens in June or July. I can't remember the exact date this year. And then trunk or treat events. So we have 2 big events that are absolutely 100% no strings attached events that will impact the community greatly. and get our name out there, not for our glory, but just so that people are more comfortable and feel more connected with us, give us opportunity to talk and engage with people. And then 2 events that are designed, so come and see. Come and join us. And Christmas and Easter are the 2 times a year where people who are not normally connected to church would be more likely to connect. They're great invite opportunities. So that's a strategy in a very broad sense. Number 3, 3 new groups. And again, we're almost there, but the Bible study, which many of you are taking part in, that happens Wednesday night, that was one of the goals. We really need something, as you know, we're seeing new people literally every week come in through our doors, and they want to get connected, and we desperately need a group that will focus on people to connect and take that first step. And also a men's breakfast, and I touched on this more in depth, and I won't get too in depth with it today, but just the idea that men are tough. Women are much easier to connect with, and whenever men's a little tougher, and sometimes something that's designed in the flow of a man's regular day is a good way to connect with men. So that's what we're looking at. Number 2 would be 2 complete worship teams and 2 complete Kids Point teams, because one of the things you always hear when we're trying to the biggest barrier for most people in working in kids ministry is I don't want to miss church. Well, if we can cut that in half and say we won't always miss church, right? You're not going to just be stuck downstairs with kids, and for people who love to working with kids, it's not being stuck anywhere. It's an honor, it's a privilege. You saw Kelly earlier just like well up with tears, right? It's not a chore. But we need 2 teams at least, and 2 complete worship teams. A lot of people don't realize the amount of time it takes the band to prepare. It's not just a rehearsal on Thursday night. It's individual practice. It's time that's spent for these individuals to hone their craft and get ready, and it's a big commitment. And to be able to give them some relief sometime would just be fantastic. And there's many people in this congregation that are musically talented and gifted and want to be part, and so we're trying to find ways to engage. So the goal is 2 complete teams. All of that, when all of those boxes are ticked, so to speak, it would lead us to one big event, which would be the launching of a second service, because we're right there. We need that, and having a second service will allow us to have even more reach. Right now, to be honest, we're limited. We could be a victim of our own success. If we actually promoted heavily in the community, we don't have room for everybody. So we need opportunity for more people to connect with us. But all those other pieces, once they're in place, lead naturally to that one. So that's our 10-point approach for this year. It's achievable. We're praying for it. We're already seeing it. On the way out this morning, you will get that in a handout, as well as some other information you can take with you and make it a regular matter of your prayer. Speaking of which, let's pray. Lord, thank you.